From Nashville, Tennessee, Music City, USA, and the home of hot chicken, it's the Rick Altizer Show. Sit back, buckle up. Rick will talk with the movers, shakers, and creators who put Christ in Christian entertainment. He's a man who's clear so the world can hear. Here's Rick Altizer.
Hey, thank you so much for joining me today. I am just so thrilled. My guest, it's part 2 of my interview with Phil Keaggy. I'm in Phil's recording studio here in Nashville. And if you missed part 1, you can go to my website, rickaltizer.com, or you can go to any place the podcasts are playing and you can hear it. But Phil, thank you so much for being with us and welcome back.
Oh, you're so welcome, Rick. Now that I'm more awake.
Yes, I love that. That's Phil. Is that you doing me?
Maybe. Let's harmonize.
That's it. Welcome.
Welcome. Okay, one more time.
Welcome. Oh, I went up and you went up.
Okay, you go up and I'll stay down.
Welcome,
everybody. All right,
that's fun.
Oh, it's more fun to sing, actually.
It is. Let's just sing our interview.
Yeah,
okay,
well,
so
I got off to a rough start.
In our last interview, you talked about how you came to the Lord.
Okay.
How you lost your mom in a car accident that really turned you around. You had amazing experience with the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. You even got healed of sinus issues, where God did a physical work in your body. Mm-hmm. So there's this amazing, where God is making His presence known in your life.
Truly. God
is reaching down, saving you, and doing something in you.
Right.
So then, as a musician, then, how do you respond there? You're in glass harp at the time, and now you have this major transformation. And so can we talk just kind of what happened from there?
Well, I've known John Safara, our drummer, since 8th grade. We were close friends. And Daniel and I and John, then also as 3-member group, we were all good friends. And we got along great with each other. I was the one that was more vocal, outspoken about my faith. And we were all raised Catholic. But I was very evangelical. I wanted to evangelize. I wanted to let other people know what I experienced, what I discovered. And also I was reading the Bible a lot, and it was really speaking to my life, and it also opened my mind up to not just spiritual truths revealed in the Scripture, but it opened my heart to people. I really began to notice and glean from the wisdom of the older ones, my brothers and sisters who were decades older than me. And I just came to love people, and I saw people's needs, my generation, people looking for answers, and I felt a compassion for them, and I wanted to tell them, hey, Jesus loves you, and He could change your life, and so that happened. The guys kind of let me do my thing, we held the band together, from August 68, June 68 through I left in August 72. In that time, we did 4 albums, and we did a lot of touring across the country. And I had some great experiences with meeting people, meeting other musicians, and praying with them and praying for them and sharing my life. And one of the things that happened musically to me was, I was always wanting to be this fancy, fast guitar player, but all of a sudden melody began to mean more to me. The purpose of playing. What am I trying to say with my instrument? And also at the same time, I came to love acoustic music more too, which is why What a Day is kind of the album it is as compared to the glass harp stuff. And then eventually I got back into bands and toured and did electric stuff too by 1976, 75,
So, I want to stay in 72, 73 right now. So you're changing, you're on a secular label, you're on Decca, so you're not on a Christian label.
No.
And you're a Christian, and you're writing Christian songs,
right?
Not even aware that there's this whole subculture of Christian music happening, you know, and so you're writing these songs about Jesus. Are you getting pushback from the label? Are you getting pushback from?
Actually, no. The label didn't communicate with me very much. Our producer did, though. Louis Merenstein, who was the producer of Van Morrison's great albums, Moondance and Astro Weeks. He also produced Turley Richards and a lot of different artists. He chose The Answer to go on our second album, and that was clearly about Jesus. I say, the answer is Jesus. You don't need to be alone anymore. And I said, I'm surprised you picked that one, on this album with the group. He goes, well, I thought it was too pretty not to have on the album. So I discovered some of the music that was coming out of Southern California. A friend of mine shared a tape in 1971 or two of Love Song. And I said, I love these guys. And they became my favorite band. They only had one album out, but I heard a demo tape, and it was really great. Eventually, they had their second album coming out, and by the time their second album came out, they invited me to tour with them, and I toured with them, between September, October, November.
As a solo artist?
No, I was in the band.
You were in
Love Song. I replaced for that tour over 3 months Bob Wall.
Okay, so you played in Love Song.
As their guitarist, and I did some BGVs, but most of the time just mainly playing. And I really enjoyed that.
And there was a lot of that camaraderie in that time. I mean, you're playing with Paul Clark.
Sure.
You're playing with Second Chapter of Acts.
Yes.
You're kind of like, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, Phil's a great guitar player. Let's get him in the band. He'll play, sing some songs.
I did a tour with Honey Tree, Paul Clark, Second Chapter of Acts. We toured. I played on 3 of their albums and Matthew Ward's album. And also I was doing dates, with Larry and Randy, back in those days. So
I saw you on a Russ Tapp video.
Yeah, that was 86.
You show up in a Russ Tapp video.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like Phil Keaggy's with everybody.
I was popular then.
But the Michael McDonald of guitar.
Well, I was getting around, and thing is, during the 70s, Brent and I were living in upstate New York, and it was a pleasure to get outside of New York and be in Ohio again, and Indiana, California, the West Coast, up and down, touring.
It is an amazing thing. You're listening to the Rick Altizer Show on Bot Radio, 89.1 FM, 1160 AM, Nashville.
And now back to my interview with Phil Keaggy. So let's get into how did What a Day that. So leaving the band and becoming solo, and then making What a Day. What?
Well, I had been writing these songs while I was on the road. I'd write these songs, and a lot of them were inspired by scriptures or poems or something, and in my own experience. And then Glass Harp did this thing for a TV station up in Cleveland for a kids show. It was for an NPR thing, and then the next time they invited me to come up and do just guitar by myself. And the man that was there at the studio, who was involved with the TV station, he said, I really believe in what you're doing. If you ever want to come in here and just put down some music, I'll give you a good rate. So he actually forwarded and advanced me credit at the studio, Cleveland recording. Gary Hedden was the engineer. And we did What a Day over 6 days, I think it was. And
so you had the songs written?
Yeah, I had the songs written, played all the instruments, did all the vocals.
Were you thinking to yourself, these aren't Glass Harp songs? These are something different?
Yeah, it was kind of its own kind of creation. Very acoustic, classical, with touches of electric and drums and keys and bass.
It's so McCartney.
Yeah, he was an influence. Yeah,
I mean the McCartney album and the Ram album. I mean, I just hear so much. It was great.
Well, thanks. I
loved it.
I loved it. There's a sweet spirit to that What a Day album for sure. And the guys in Love Song heard that album. Well, Jay, the bass player, and he heard that album. Then he read an interview I'd done in a magazine with the Glass Harp, and he he saw where I'm saying, "Who's your favorite band?" And I said, "Love Song." That's when they got a hold of me. And I was just married to Bernadette for a month, and we drove out together in a van to California. And we spent the next almost up into December, touring, and it was a great experience.
How did you make the switch then from leaving Glass Harp to a solo career?
It was a very slow process. I mean, I talked about leaving the group for a good year before that. They kind of knew it was coming. I was sad, they were sad, and some people got very upset with me, especially our fans in Ohio. But we have to walk.
Sure. Where
we have to walk. The cool thing about it was that was 72. In 81, we teamed up and did a rehearsal and did a spontaneous set in Cleveland and Akron when I was touring with another band, the band I had out of Kansas City. And so unannounced, we did our whole Carnegie Hall set, in Cleveland, and then the next night at Akron, and surprised a lot of people. And it was beautiful. And ever since then, we always keep in touch, and we did a few more albums since then, a live album at the Youngstown Symphony, and we did we collected an album, a CD, 3 CD set of jams, and we did another studio album down here and another studio.
It's so hard to do, in a 30-minute time frame, interviews with you because there's so much. You just kind of have to. There's a good deal
of stuff.
It's so much. So then, how did What a Day get released? How did that come out? So you made this album.
Yeah.
He's giving me these great rates, credit,
right?
And you're just kind of making this music about Jesus. And then how did it get released?
It's interesting. One of the managers of Glass Harp, even though I had recorded this album and I had left the group, we were still friends, and he took it to this new Christian label he heard about in Texas, Myrrh. And they turned it down. They said it doesn't fit our style of music. I'm going, what fits? And it's kind of a story of my life in terms of it never quite fits, but it's something else. So anyway, it just kind of sat on the shelf, and then eventually Scott Ross created his own label called New Song Records, and we had it pressed on vinyl and cassette, through an independent small little label called New Song. And there it is. Actually,
he's pointing to the wall.
Again. I do
the
that.
album cover's on his wall in his recording studio, and
you can see What a Day and the rainbow around my
rainbow and
happy
him.
shiny face with my beard.
Yeah,
but there's no Phil Keaggy at the bottom. Just have the titles of the songs, and. I thought that's interesting.
The name's not on the cover.
Not on the front.
On the front cover.
It is on the back.
It's on the spine, but...
it's interesting.
Yeah.
Then, Buck Herring of Second Chapter of Acts, he heard this album, but he knew of my work in Glass Harp. And he approached me 2 years after this album came out, and he said, hey, I'd like to produce you. And then that was a big experience.
Right.
I met Keith Green. Keith taught me the song Your Love Broke Through, that he had just written with Randy and Todd Fishkin. And it was great.
That album had time. It had so many great classic songs, that... And the production was a whole different kind of thing. You had horns, you got big rocking band, and
the players were Leland Sklar on bass and Larry Knechtel on keys and Jim Gordon on drums and Michael Omartian doing strings, and
these are all top session guys.
Yeah,
for those who don't know who those people are, they're the top of the top.
Yeah, they
are.
Crop,
And
Mylon Lefevre and Annie Herring and Matthew were the BGVs, and
great background vocals on that.
It was very good.
Yeah.
I still sound like a kid though. I hadn't grown. I hadn't grown up yet, and now I'm past growing up. But I'm growing down.
Now that was that. What label was that? Was that on New Song as well?
Yeah, it was. It had that Flower Rose label, and because
that's not on iTunes, but What a Day is.
That's because I independently released it.
Okay.
I do. Gary Hedden did remaster. No, it wasn't. It wasn't Gary Hedden. He remastered "Wind in the Wheat" and "What a Day." It was David Harris who produced Mickey Dolenz album I played on some years ago. We became friends, and he remastered "Love Broke Through," and it sounds wonderful. Really sounds good. And I have it ready to go, but we haven't put it out.
Okay.
I guess there's too much else going on at the moment, but I'd love to see that album come out, be up on iTunes, So.
Yeah, that's such a great, like I said, that was the staple for me. That's what got me through high school. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Then I did a band album with the guys up in New York, Phil Madeira, Lynn Nichols, and Terry Anderson, and Dan Cunningham.
And Lynn stayed with you for a long time, went on to be
producer,
head of A&R at Word, and became a big hotshot in the music biz. So
very clever fella.
Yes.
And very talented. And we did Sunday's Child, Find Me in These Fields, and Crimson and Blue.
In case you didn't realize it, you're listening to a really nice guy. The Rick Altizer Show on Bot Radio, 89.1 FM, 1160 AM, Nashville.
And now back to my interview with Phil Keaggy.
And then in the middle of all that, I did Beyond Nature, which is a completely different departure. So...
Well, that's you. You're always doing these departures.
Yes, I am.
So then Annie and Buck Herring from Second Chapter of Acts, Annie Herring and Matthew Ward from Second Chapter of Acts, and her husband Buck Herring, the producer. You start working with them. They produce you. You go on tour with them. How the West was one. You did a live album with them, and then you're kind of in this early beginnings of the Christian Jesus movement and the Christian music industry as it's kind of burgeoning and trying to decide what it's going to be. Were you getting feedback and were you getting pushback from churches? You're kind of groundbreaking, getting Christian music and drum sets into churches. So how was that experience, and what can you tell me from that era?
Well, I recall the Phil Keaggy Band with Lynn and Phil and the other guys. We did a lot of school auditoriums, colleges. We do churches, but, back in those days, in the 70s, they weren't like the venues churches have for concerts today. You know what I'm talking about? Like The Belonging is a good example here in town. That big stage, great sound and lights and everything. Now you have more of those kind of venues, but back in those days we were playing colleges and some churches and high schools, and pushback, I don't know. I think it's because there was always this softer side, even to my rock side. I wasn't like screaming like a banshee.
Yes.
It was kind of musical and melodic, and I loved a lot of my stuff was rooted in acoustic music.
And your vocals are accessible. They are. They're not screamy, aggressive, angry type vocals. They're very accessible. Very much in a McCartney vein.
Somewhat.
I know you were both very influenced by that, but the vocals are very accessible. So I could see that as being. Whereas I don't know.
It helped some. Yeah.
Rez Band just had a rougher look to them, it had a rougher sound.
And they had a real vision about who they wanted to reach too,
Yeah.
I was just kind of like feeling that I was called to express what was inside me with no heavy agenda. I wanted to make music, and I wanted to tell people about Jesus through my music, and then as we went through hardship in the 70s too, during the time between, Love Broke Through and Master and the Musician. My wife and I, we lost babies 3 times. Premature births. They weren't just miscarriages. One was a miscarriage. But the first time was triplet boys at 5.5 months along. Next year, a baby boy at 6.5 months along named Ryan, who lived 3 days. And so we went through a lot of heartache and tears, and my appreciation and respect for my wife is just for what she went through. But then God was faithful and good to us. He's good to all of us. But we don't know why, but we were able to have 3 healthy children.
Praise the
after
Lord.
that. And she wrote a book called Deeper Shade of Grace that was eventually re-released called Losing You Too Soon, which tells our story. And you could really hear her heart and our heart in that book. So I think it's been a help to people who've lost kids. But just a few weeks before Alicia was born in March of 1980, and I was writing songs for an album I was to do that year called Flipside. I wrote little ones, about the sanctity of life. I started singing that again in concert last couple weeks, and folks come up to me and say, "Did you write that because of the present atmosphere and what's going on right now?" Mm-hmm. I said, "Actually, I wrote that about 39 years ago," and so having seen little Ryan and his little hand holding my finger, fighting for life, and his perfectly shaped eyelashes, fingernails, hair, just beautiful. Mm-hmm. And we lost him. It just breaks your heart. So that was the 80s. Now wasn't about just discovering Jesus, and which was a wonderful thing, and going through the changes of the 70s, and the 80s were about the family. Mm-hmm. We started having kids, and I started to reflect that in my music. A child in everyone's heart, little ones, spend my life with you. She came to stay. I was writing songs to Bernadette. And
so how did you navigate that? Because being in the 80s, you were a bit of a road dog. I mean, you had the band and you were traveling, doing a lot of touring. Mm-hmm. So how did you navigate that with the family life?
Well, when the kids were little, we took them with us on the bus.
Bernadette came with you?
Yeah.
She toured with you?
Yeah, but not always. Mm-hmm. It was around 1984. I was doing a lot of traveling, and 85, and they'd be like 4-week tours. By the time 87 came around, and I'm still making albums in the studio too. I toured England, Scotland, and Wales with Sheila Walsh in a band, and I decided I'm not doing that anymore. So, and this was after Ian was born. He was just a couple months old. Our son is now 31, and I said no more of that. I'm just going to do weekends, and for the most part, I went to acoustic concerts, occasional band tours, but they'd only be like 3 dates at a time or 4, then back home. Mm-hmm. I wanted to be home for the kids, tuck them in and pray with them and take them to school. I wanted to be involved in their lives. And we're very close today as a family, so I'm grateful for that.
That's great you were able to transition to, I remember when that happened, when you started just going out with the guitar. You had the looper, that little loop box where you started.
It's a cheap band.
you would do percussion things and loop it. And part of the fun was watching you do it. Part of the fun of the show was sitting there watching you with this little foot pedal playing percussion stuff and rhythm stuff and singing into your guitar and doing harmony parts. Son, 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 here we come. Just these different fun things you would do.
Yep.
That, were just... It did.
I tried to make it interesting.
It did. It was so much more interesting than just a guy with a guitar up there singing. It wasn't like that at all. It was an experience.
Yeah, and nowadays a lot of guitar players are doing looping and stuff like that, and some are even famous, like Ed Sheeran. But I'm going to be doing some band dates in a month, and I'm kind of looking forward to not doing that. Just playing with 3 other guys.
Right.
Tony and Jerry and Mike Pacelli is going to play guitar too for me.
Wow.
And for us. So
Tony Levin?
Tony Levin, Jerry Murata. We're doing 5 dates.
Oh my goodness.
In March.
That's going to be amazing. You going to be in town here?
Nope, not here. All Northeast. But I've been practicing. I've been digging in woodshedding with my guitar and my electric stuff, because I'm learning the licks as close as possible to this album, because that's just how it, that's the way it's got to be.
Well, again, we're out of time again. I mean, it's just amazing. I'm telling you, these go quick. These really do.
Well, was that content of that?
Yeah, that was great.
Okay.
And I just want you to know. I mean, I appreciate so much your heart, but just that God has given you a gift And you've been a good steward of that gift. You haven't.
I've tried. I've tried.
You continue to put out music.
Yeah.
Anybody who's a Phil Keaggy fan, I mean, they're going to have a good life because there's a lot of good stuff coming from you.
Well, thank you.
Still coming from you. You're still doing new things, trying new things.
Yeah.
Pushing the boundary, doing new stuff. And it was just a pleasure to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you, Rick.
I mean, I could do 4 more of these, and we'd end up making a book, but we could use it all for a book. But I know you got other things to do today, and I just want to thank you so much for being on the show. Thanks, Phil.
You're welcome.
If there's a show you've missed, you can go to my website, rickaltizer.com, and catch up. Or you can listen to my podcast in iTunes or wherever you hear your podcasts. Just search for The Rick Altizer Show. Altizer is spelled Altizer. I want to thank you for listening. Hey, would you tell a friend about this show and share the love? Be sure to check us out again next week as we discuss how we communicate the gospel through media to our culture. Let's be clear so the world can hear. I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening.